From the campus of St. Bonaventure High School, it is episode 118 of the OLA Adult Dad Faith Formation Weekly Gospel Podcasts. Max is behind the camera. I'm in front of the camera. Pause button by my side. And what's with the pink shirt again, Charles? Again, remember, as I mentioned in the previous podcast, we're filming these back to back to back to back. So this is our fourth straight podcast we're filming. Hence, I'm still in the same shirt. So this is the 25th Sunday in Ordinary Time. We are back in the Gospel of Luke after jumping out of Luke and into John for the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross last Sunday. Now we're back into the Gospel of Luke, and we're looking at one of those Sundays where there's an option of a longer reading or a shorter reading. And as you well know, we always opt for the longer reading. Two reasons, because number one, if your parish does go with the longer reading, you have it now. And number two, the longer reading gives us a chance to really kind of delve into the fullness of this gospel passage rather than just a slice of it. So we're going to go with the longer version, which is Luke 16, verses 1 to 13. The shorter version, which we will not do, is Luke 16, verses 10 to 13. So quite a difference. Long version has 13 verses. Short version has about 3 verses. We're going to do the long version because in the long version, it gives us several things that we'll need to unpack in order to get to the bottom line and the punchline, so to speak, of what Jesus is telling us in this Sunday's gospel reading. So Luke 16, verses 1 to 13. Let's set the context, okay? It says, Jesus said to his disciples. So that's the audience. Jesus is speaking to his disciples. And let's remind ourselves, this being Luke chapter 16, we're still in the travel narrative. Chapters 9 to 19 of Luke, Jesus is traveling to Jerusalem to go to the cross. So everything he says in chapters 9 to 19, everything he does, he's doing on the way to the cross. So this is Luke 16. He's telling his disciples this on the way to the cross. So what is he telling his disciples? He gives them kind of like a parable. He says, a rich man had a steward who was reported to him for squandering his property. He, the rich man, summoned him, the steward, and said, what is this I hear about you? Prepare a full account of your stewardship, because you can no longer be my steward. Let's hit the pause button. So, Jesus, traveling to Jerusalem to go to the cross, is talking to his disciples. He gives them a parable. He says, okay, disciples, picture this. There's a rich man who had a steward, right? And the steward was basically squandering the rich man's property. He was maybe, embezzling some of his funds, his property, right? The rich man got wind of it and called the steward onto the carpet and said, look, what's this I hear about you? You're embezzling from me. You're squandering my property. Give me a full account. Tell me where we are before I fire you. Okay? Now, let's do a little kind of culture and historical background here. Okay? At this particular time, okay, if you were rich and you had a lot of land, a lot of these rich landowners back in the day, they were absentee landlords, okay? They would have land, they would have crops or a vineyard on the land, and but they would be traveling. They would be in maybe one of their other locations, one of their other houses. So when they were gone from the property, what they would do is they would have a steward, kind of a right-hand man, to manage the property for them while the master was gone, right? He would put his property and that vineyard or the crops or whatever he had on the property, he would put his property into the hands of the steward. And the steward was responsible for looking after the property and making sure the property produced the profit that the landowner was expecting. And when the landowner would come back, the first thing he would do is ask the steward for an accounting. Hey, how did we do? What was our profit while I was gone? Well, that's what's happening here, okay? The rich man has called the steward in and basically said, hey, how have we done? What's my profit, all right? And apparently the rich man, the landowner, had got wind that while he was gone, the steward was embezzling from him, was squandering some of the property. So when the landowner comes back and does the usual thing, brings the steward in to ask for an accounting, he basically tells the steward, look, I'm back, standard procedure, I call you in, ask for how we did, but I want to let you know, I know what you've been doing, right? You've been stealing from me, so now I'm going to fire you. That's what's going on here. That's the whole parable, right? Now, let's shift the focus from the landowner, the rich man, to the steward. Put yourself in the place of the steward now, okay? This was your job. This is how you made your living, right? Now you're about to be fired. You're going to have no job. You're going to be unemployed. So you're saying to yourself, as the steward does, the steward said to himself, what shall I do? Now that my master is taking the position of steward away from me. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm too ashamed to beg. So if you're the steward, and you know you're about to be fired, and you're about to lose your job, you're saying to yourself, just as the steward did, well, what am I going to do now? All right, I'm not going to have any way of making a living. Well, I could become a day laborer, but I'm not strong enough to do that. On the other hand, I could beg for a living, but I'm too ashamed to do that. So if I'm not strong enough to become a day laborer and I'm too ashamed to beg, how am I going to make any money? How am I going to survive? And then the steward has an idea, right? Let's see what the steward says. He says, this is the steward kind of talking to himself. I know what I shall do, okay, so that when I'm removed from my stewardship, okay, they may welcome me into their homes. So you're the steward now. You're saying, okay, I'm about to lose my job. I have no way to make a living, no way to support myself. Not strong enough to dig, too proud to beg. I know what I'm going to do, okay? All these people that owe money to my master, all these people that owe money to this landlord, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to each of them and tell them, look, you owe my master so much money, cross that out and write in a lesser amount, okay? Then he'll go to the next person. You owe my master so much money, cross that out, put in a lesser amount, right? So he's doing this, as the reading tells us, because he thinks, hey, if I can get these people to pay less than they owe, they're going to be grateful. They're going to be kind of in my debt now, right? So now, by reducing their debt, I'm ingratiating myself to them. And hopefully, I can, that's my way of ensuring of making a living. Hopefully, maybe I can go to work for one of them, right? So what this steward is doing, it's very ingenious. He's saying, look, I can't dig, I'm too ashamed to beg. Well, I'm going to ingratiate myself to these people by reducing the debt they owe to my master in hopes that maybe I can kind of take on with some of them. Ingenious. I mean, you got to give the steward credit for kind of devising such a plan, because he's up against it, right? He's staring down the barrel of not being able to survive. So he comes up with this plan, and he follows through with the plan. The reading continues. He goes to each one of these. It says, "You owe my master 100 bushels of wheat. Cross it out and put 70, etc., etc." Right. So that's the parable that Jesus is telling his disciples. All right. Now, at this point, let's hit the pause button. Okay, because if we're looking at this guy's plan, we have to give him. It's pretty ingenious, right? There's some ingenuity to it, right? He's come up with a plan that enables him to continue to be able to support himself, right? We'll learn further on in the passage, Jesus even commends this guy for doing that. All right. But let's look a little deeper, okay? Yes, in going to all these people and telling them, look, you owe my master so much, cross it out and reduce the amount. Yes, that's a win for those people. They now have to pay the master less. It's a win for the steward because now he's ingratiating himself to these people, and maybe he can kind of ask them for some favors later on. So it's a win for the debtors. It's a win for the steward, but he's ripping off the master in the process. Because in telling the debtors, look, you owe my master 100 bushels of wheat, cross it out and put 70, he's continuing to rip off the master. All right? So yes, it's an ingenious plan. Yes, it's a win for the debtors. Yes, it's a win for the steward, but it comes at the expense of ripping off the master. All right? It's an ingenious plan, but it's a bad act because he's ripping off his master. All right? So then the question comes up, Jesus praises this guy for doing this. So is Jesus all of a sudden praising ripping people off, praising stealing, praising going behind somebody's back? Why would Jesus praise? Why would he take this man's bad act and make it a good example for his disciples and by extension us? It doesn't seem to compute, okay, until we look further on in the reading, because after Jesus gives the parable, he then gives the disciples a couple of lessons from this parable, okay? Look at the first thing Jesus says after he finishes the parable. He says, "For," okay, that word "for," so he's just given them the parable, right? And now he's going to move into a number of lessons the disciples and us should glean from that parable. And he starts the lessons with the word "for," okay? So he's told the parable, and in essence he's telling his disciples, okay, here's the parable, here's the situation. Therefore, what does this all mean? What's your takeaway? Okay, Jesus says there's a couple of takeaways. Takeaway number one is, for the children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. That's the first lesson. The children of this world are more prudent in dealing with their own generation than the children of the light. Now, what is Jesus getting to here? He's saying, look, he's saying to his disciples and by extension us, okay, that as believers, we should be as passionate, we should be as eager, we should be as industrious, we should put as much effort into pursuing holiness, into growing in the faith, into hopefully entering into eternal life. We should put as much passion and emphasis and effort and time into that than we do with some of our earthly endeavors, piling up wealth, piling up possessions, piling up notoriety, piling up popularity. He's almost saying, look, on the natural level, people spend a tremendous amount of time and effort and passion acquiring these earthly treasures. And Jesus says, what I wish they would do is spend as much or more time, effort, passion and enthusiasm in acquiring treasures that really matter, treasures of heaven. Okay? So the children of the light, the believers, should be just as industrious in piling up heavenly treasures as non-believers are in piling up earthly treasures. That's the first lesson. Okay? Then he says something else. I tell you, make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth, so that when it fails, you will be welcomed into eternal dwelling. Now again, this is a bit of a head scratcher. Make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth, okay? So that you can, that you'll be able to be welcomed into eternal dwellings, all right? So he's saying, look, okay, with the possessions and the money and the popularity and the notoriety, with whatever you've been able to acquire naturally, whatever natural things you're able to acquire in this world, okay, use them not just for your own self, but use them to help others. So if you're if you're popular, if you have notoriety, if you have a platform, where people listen to you or watch you, use your platform in a way that advances the kingdom of God, in a way that proclaims Christ. Okay, because if you do that, you'll be acquiring these heavenly treasures. Okay, if you have wealth, use that in a way to be generous to help those that are needy, and in so doing, you'll be piling up heavenly treasures. So what Jesus is saying when he says, "Make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth," so when it fails, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwelling. He's saying, look, with whatever natural goods or time that you've been given or that you've acquired, make sure you don't use them just on the natural level, and make sure you don't use them just on yourself or for yourself. Use them for the benefit of others. And in doing so, you'll be piling up earthly treasures, and you'll be welcomed into heaven. That's what he's getting to here. All right. Then he gives them a third lesson. He says, the person who is trustworthy in very small matters is also trustworthy in great ones. And the person who is dishonest in very small matters is also dishonest in great ones. If, therefore, you are trustworthy with dishonest wealth, who will trust you with true wealth? Okay? If you are not trustworthy with what belongs to another, who will give you what is yours? So this third lesson, Jesus said, look, a person who is trustworthy in very small matters is also trustworthy in great ones. The lesson here is, and you can state it a couple of different ways, how you do one thing is how you do everything. Okay? How you do small tasks will be indicative of how you do big tasks. All right? So, however small or significant something is that you do, all right, do it to the best of your ability. Do it maximizing the time and skills that God has given you. Do it for the right reason, however small it will be, okay, because that is going to form the pattern. That is going to form you into how you do other things. How you do one thing is how you do everything. Back in the day when there was an airline called Eastern Airlines, and the former astronaut Frank Borman was the CEO of Eastern Airlines, and he was trying to turn it around because they weren't making much of a profit. One of his saying is, stains, and now this was back in the day where, you had the flip down trays, and where people actually ate meals. They were served full meals on their flights, right? And he was famous for saying that, dirty flip down trays is indicative of lousy engine maintenance. And if you're saying, well, what is a flip down tray that hasn't been wiped clean? All right, what does that have to do with maintaining a jet engine? Well, what Frank Bourne was trying to get to his employees is saying it has every connection, okay, because it forms the pattern of how you do your work, okay, how much attention to detail you have or how little attention to detail you have, okay. So, the small thing of wiping up a coffee stain on a flip down tray, okay, if you go to the extent of doing that and addressing that situation, that forms your character in how you approach bigger tasks. How you do one thing is how you do everything. And that's kind of what Jesus is getting to here when he says the person who is trustworthy in small matters is also trustworthy in great ones, okay? Because again, you don't want to be trustworthy in just the big things and not so much in the small things. You want to be trustworthy, period. So no matter how small or how big, that is your character. You are trustworthy. The situation, the circumstances doesn't determine your trustworthiness, the effort you put into something. That's not dictated by the circumstances or the situation. It's dictated by your character, okay? And if it's dictated by your character, you'll approach small things in the same mindset that you'll approach larger things, okay? That's what he's telling his disciples here when he gives them that third lesson, okay? So, in wrapping this all up and in giving this parable to his disciples, okay, the reason he praises this steward's bad act as a good example, okay, is he's saying, look, the steward, even though, I'm not praising what he did because he ripped off his master, that's not what I'm praising. What I'm praising is his ingenuity and the time and the effort and the thought he put into it. And disciples, and by extension all of us, it's as if Jesus is saying, what I wish for believers is they put in the same thought, the same time, the same effort, the same ingenuity, the same mindset into pursuing holiness and the things that really matter that this guy put into this situation, okay? Because he was putting in this time and effort because he was trying to make a living. He was putting in this time and effort to live, to continue to live. Jesus is saying you should put in that same time and effort and ingenuity and mindset into living eternally and doing what it takes to living eternally. That's what Jesus is getting at when he gives this parable and he gives those lessons after this parable, okay? Now, the shorter version, just if you were curious, picks up with just these lessons. The shorter version doesn't give the parable. And that's a reason why I like the longer version, because the lessons come after the parable. So in order to understand the lessons, you have to understand the parable that preceded it, right? Context, context, context. So the long version gives you the parable, which we went through, and it gives you the lessons that Jesus wants his disciples then and us now to glean, okay? Bottom line, if you said, Charles, just give me the Reader's Digest version of this whole thing in 2 or 3 sentences, what is my takeaway? It's Jesus wants us to put the same time, effort, ingenuity, mindset into pursuing the things that really matter, okay, that this guy did in pursuing the things on an earthly level. So with that brings to a close the 25th Sunday of Ordinary Time, episode number 118. So, in the same pink shirt, on the campus of St. Bonaventure High School, with Max behind the camera, until we meet again for episode 119, I'm Charles Merritt. Take care and God bless.